Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into what we're calling digital plus plus.
Digital plus plus.
Yeah,
That's catchy.
I like it. It's basically what's next for the whole digital world,
Mm.
and what it means for all sorts of things like security, trust, even human rights.
Yeah.
We've got some really interesting sources for this one.
Yeah.
Excerpts from a compilation called Digital Plus Plus,
Okay.
some material on the UAE's national blockchain strategy,
Interesting.
and a white paper all about facial recognition technology in India.
Wow.
So buckle up. We're going to cover a lot of ground today.
I'm excited.
It's fascinating how all these topics, at first glance, they seem totally different,
Yeah.
but they're all kind of intertwined.
You're all connected.
And I think as we dig deeper, you'll start to see how it all connects.
Absolutely.
Okay, so first, something we all know. The digital world is just growing like crazy. I mean, just look at how much we all rely on technology now compared to even a few years ago. It's wild. But here's a stat that puts it all in perspective. In 2022, 66% of the global population was online.
Wow.
That's over 5.3 billion people.
That's incredible.
Right?
Yeah, and that number's only going to increase as more and more countries, embrace this whole digitalization trend.
For sure.
But what I find really interesting is how different countries are approaching this, right? Like each with its own unique model.
That's a great point. And,
Yeah.
one model that's really caught our eye is India's digital public infrastructure, or DPI.
DPI.
DPI, yeah.
Oh.
It's built on these principles of, open protocols, modular design, unbundled processes.
Oh,
I'm not going to lie, I'm not the most tech-savvy person.
sure.
Can you break that down for me and our listeners a little bit? What does that actually mean in practice?
Of course. So think of it like Lego blocks, right?
Go.
Each piece has a specific function, but you can combine them in tons of different ways to create something new. That's kind of what DPI is all about. It's about creating this really flexible, adaptable digital infrastructure that can be used to build all sorts of services and applications.
Ah, okay. So it's not just taking the systems we have now and putting them online. It's like rethinking how everything works from the ground up.
Exactly. And India has already implemented some really amazing examples of DPI in action. Take India Stack, for instance.
Okay.
They use their national digital identity system, Aadhaar, as a foundation, and then you build on top of that with layers like UPI for payments.
Right. UPI has totally revolutionized how people pay for things over there. I've heard stories about street vendors, like street vendors accepting digital payments, which is just incredible.
That's amazing.
It makes you realize how far behind other countries are in terms of truly seamless digital transactions.
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of inclusive digitalization, it has the potential to empower millions of people, not just in India, but globally.
Totally. And it's not just about payments, right? There's also DIPA, which is the Data Empowerment Protection Architecture.
Okay.
I'm guessing this has something to do with data privacy.
You got it. Remember those Lego blocks?
Yeah.
So DIPA introduces these things called consent managers, which basically act as digital gatekeepers for your data.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So instead of companies just having free reign over our information, we actually get to decide what they can access.
Exactly.
That sounds like a huge step forward for, user controls. That's something other countries are looking into.
Absolutely. Many see India's DPI as a model for building a more equitable digital future. And another great example of that is ONDC,
ONDC?
the Open Network for Digital Commerce.
Right. I've heard a bit about that.
Yeah.
It's supposed to, really shake up the e-commerce world, right?
Yeah.
What's the big idea behind it?
So imagine a world where you're not limited to buying from just one or two giant e-commerce platforms, right?
Okay.
ONDC aims to really level the playing field by creating this open network where any seller can connect with any buyer.
So it's like an online marketplace, but without the gatekeepers.
Precisely. Yeah, this means more choice for consumers, obviously, and more opportunities for smaller businesses to actually compete.
Right.
Plus, it gives sellers greater control over their data and how it's used.
And when you think about the potential impact this could have on India's economy, it's already projected to reach $800 billion by 2030.
Wow.
That kind of growth could create tons of new jobs and opportunities. It's pretty exciting to think about.
It is. And India's innovative approach to digitalization doesn't stop there.
Really?
They're also working on this really cool project called Pashini.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about Pashini.
So, you know how many different languages are spoken in India?
Oh, a lot.
It's incredibly diverse,
Yeah.
but the diversity also presents a challenge when it comes to digital inclusion.
How so?
Well, a huge portion of the population is offline simply because they can't access content in their native language.
That's a barrier most of us never even have to think about.
Right.
So how is Pashini addressing that?
Well, it uses AI and natural language processing to translate between all these different languages,
Right.
making it possible for people to access the internet in their mother tongue. Imagine the impact. 53% of non-internet users in India said they would start using the internet if content were available in their language.
That's like opening up the digital world to an entire nation.
Mm-hmm.
It just goes to show how India is really thinking outside the box, not just about expanding access to the internet, but making sure it's truly inclusive for everyone.
Exactly. And this brings us to a really crucial point: the need for global digital standards.
Okay.
Right now, the digital landscape is kind of like the Wild West.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Everyone's doing their own thing.
It reminds me of like the history of shipping containers.
Okay.
You know, it was total chaos before they were standardized. Imagine trying to move goods around the world when every port uses different size containers and loading systems.
A logistical nightmare.
Exactly. A complete nightmare. We'd be stuck in the Stone Age.
Yeah, and we're facing a similar challenge in the digital world.
In what way?
Think about something as basic as the Internet Protocol, or TCP/IP.
Okay.
Without that standardized way for computers to talk to each other, the internet as we know it just wouldn't exist.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah,
We take it for granted, but it's essential.
totally. So we need to find ways to bring that kind of standardization to other areas of the digital world.
Exactly. And India, with all their experience developing DPI that actually works for such a diverse population, they are in a unique position to contribute to shaping these global standards in a way that benefits everyone, not just those in developed countries.
This is all so fascinating, but I gotta say, with all this talk about expanding the digital world, it makes you wonder about, the potential downsides, especially when it comes to security. I mean, the more interconnected we are, the more vulnerable we become, right?
That's a fantastic point, and it leads us perfectly into our next discussion: securing digital plus plus.
All right, let's get into it. So we've talked about, the amazing speed of this digitalization and all the cool stuff that countries like India are doing to make it more inclusive.
Right.
But all this interconnectedness, I mean, it really makes you think about the security side of things.
Yeah.
I mean, we all saw what happened during the pandemic when those supply chains just went haywire.
Oh, yeah.
Empty shelves, delayed shipments. It was a mess, really.
Yeah, it was a real wake-up call for a lot of people, I think.
It does. It made me realize how vulnerable we all are to even small disruptions in these really intricate global networks.
It's true. The pandemic really exposed the fragility of, our global supply chains.
For sure.
That traditional just-in-time model, which prioritizes efficiency and minimal inventory,
Right.
it suddenly became a liability because when unexpected events hit, those finely tuned systems just couldn't cope.
So how do we fix that? I mean,
Okay.
how do we make these crucial systems more resilient, for future disruptions that are bound to happen?
Well, data is really the key here. By harnessing the power of data analytics, we can create smarter, more adaptable supply chains. Imagine having real-time visibility into every stage of the process.
Wow.
From raw materials to delivery, we could anticipate potential bottlenecks, identify alternative suppliers, and just make much more informed decisions based on, up-to-the-minute information.
That sounds like a game changer. And I'm guessing this is where all the buzz about AI and machine learning comes in.
Absolutely. We're already seeing a huge increase in the adoption of these technologies in supply chain management.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Think about it. AI algorithms that can analyze massive amounts of data, to predict demand fluctuations, optimize shipping routes, even identify potential risks before they even materialize.
It's like having a crystal ball.
It is. By 2026, it's estimated that over 50% of supply chain organizations will be using machine learning for decision-making.
That's incredible. But all this reliance on digital technology, it just brings us right back to cybersecurity. Of course. I mean, with so much data flowing through these systems, it seems like we're painting a big target on our backs for hackers.
You're absolutely right. As we become more and more reliant on digital infrastructure, cybersecurity becomes, mission critical.
For sure.
And the threats we face are constantly evolving, right? They're becoming more sophisticated, more difficult to defend against. We saw a dramatic increase in cybercrime during the pandemic.
I bet.
A staggering 500% increase, according to the Chief of Defense Staff.
500%. That's insane.
Yeah.
And I guess it's not just big corporations that are at risk here. It's small businesses too, right?
That's right. Many cybercriminals actually see small businesses as easier targets.
Oh, really?
They assume they have weaker security measures in place.
Makes sense.
And the financial impact on these businesses can be devastating, absolutely devastating. Some reports suggest that small businesses in India have faced losses of up to 7 crore from cyber attacks in just the past year.
That's terrifying for any small business owner.
Mm-hmm.
So what kind of cyber threats are we actually talking about here? Is it just the usual, like, viruses and malware?
It goes way beyond that. We're seeing highly targeted attacks, that exploit vulnerabilities in software, sometimes even flaws that the developers themselves aren't aware of yet.
Oh, wow.
These are called zero-day vulnerabilities, and they're incredibly difficult to defend against.
That's like trying to hit a moving target, right?
Exactly.
So, like, what are some of the tactics these cyber criminals are using?
Yeah.
I think our listeners would definitely want to know what to be on the lookout for.
Well, spear phishing is a classic.
Spear phishing.
Yeah, that's where attackers send these emails that look like they're from a legitimate source, like your bank, a trusted colleague.
Right.
And they trick you into clicking on a malicious link or opening an infected attachment, and boom, they've got access to your system.
Oh, it's so sneaky.
Yeah.
I always try to be so careful about what I click on.
You gotta be.
What else? What else should we be aware of?
Well, we're also seeing attacks that target the IT service supply chain.
The supply chain.
Yeah. So basically, they'll compromise software that's used by a company that provides IT services to others and then use that access to attack those downstream customers.
It's like a domino effect.
Exactly.
Wow, that's insidious.
Hmm.
And so, like, once they're in, how do they actually move around within a system?
Well, they often exploit vulnerabilities in public-facing applications like websites, online services that we use every day.
Okay.
Once they're in, they might try to steal administrative accounts, which give them even more control over the network.
But it's like a constant game of cat and mouse between the attackers and the defenders.
It is.
And it feels like things have escalated even further with the conflict in Ukraine. It's like cyberspace has become this whole new battleground, hasn't it?
Absolutely. The conflict in Ukraine has really blurred the lines between physical and cyber warfare.
In what way?
We've seen destructive cyber attacks targeting critical infrastructure like power grids, communication systems.
Oh, wow.
It's a stark reminder that cyber attacks can have very real-world consequences.
Yeah, they're not just virtual anymore.
Oh, they're not.
And it's not just about causing that physical damage, right? There's also this whole dimension of cyber influence operations, which are basically attempts to manipulate public opinion, to sow discord.
Right.
It feels like we're constantly bombarded with misinformation and fake news these days, especially online.
It's true, and digital technologies have really amplified the reach and impact of these cyber influence operations, right? They make it so easy to spread propaganda, manipulate social media algorithms, target specific individuals with, very tailored messages that are designed to influence their beliefs, their behavior.
It's kind of scary to think about how easy it is to manipulate people.
It is, yeah.
And then there's ransomware, which seems to have evolved into this whole other beast.
Oh, yeah.
I remember when it was just about, like, encrypting your files and demanding a ransom.
Right.
But it sounds like things have gotten a lot more sophisticated.
Oh, ransomware has gone way beyond simple file encryption. Now, attackers are stealing sensitive data before they even encrypt it, right?
What?
And then they use that as leverage for extortion.
Oh, wow.
They threaten to release confidential information, expose trade secrets, or even damage a company's reputation if the ransom isn't paid. It's like digital hostage-taking.
That's terrifying. It feels like we're just facing this onslaught of cyber threats from all sides.
Yeah.
What can we even do to protect ourselves in this, increasingly hostile digital world? It just feels so overwhelming.
It's important to remember that ransomware and a lot of these cyber threats, they're not just about malware.
Oh, right.
They're about human-driven intrusions, right?
Right.
So the key to an effective defense is proactive detection and response.
Okay.
We need to be constantly vigilant, monitoring our systems for any suspicious activity, and taking steps to, neutralize those threats before they can do any real damage.
So it's not enough to just set up a firewall and call it a day.
No, not anymore.
You really need to be on guard all the time, actively looking for signs of trouble.
Exactly. And for organizations that might not have the in-house expertise to handle all this, there are managed detection and response services, or MDR.
MDR.
Yeah, these are specialized teams that provide 24/7 monitoring and threat hunting. They help to identify and neutralize intrusions before they can escalate.
So they're like the cybersecurity A-team.
You got it.
That sounds super valuable, especially for smaller businesses that might not have the budget for a full-blown cybersecurity team.
Right.
But even with all these security measures in place, it still feels like you can never be 100% protected.
That's true. There's no such thing as perfect security,
Right.
but there are things we can do to significantly reduce our risk. One important step is to regularly test the effectiveness of your existing security controls.
Yeah. How do you do that?
Well, breach and attack simulation solutions, or BAS, can be really helpful.
Yes.
Yeah, they basically simulate real-world attacks,
Oh, interesting.
allowing you to identify weaknesses in your defenses, and then, you can shore them up before a real attacker comes along.
So it's all about being proactive, staying vigilant, and constantly adapting to that, ever-changing threat landscape. It's a lot to keep up with.
It is.
But it sounds like the stakes are pretty high.
They are indeed. But while security is absolutely crucial, it's only one part of the puzzle, right?
Right.
As we build this digital plus world, we also need to think about how to foster trust.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
I mean, security is essential, but it's only truly effective if it's built on a foundation of trust.
Exactly.
So how do we do that? Let's dive into that. Fostering trust in digital plus. All right, so we talked about how fast digitalization is happening
Right.
and all the security challenges that come with it.
Yeah.
But now I think it's time to tackle this whole idea of trust.
Okay.
It seems like, a pretty foundational element in a world where we're relying more and more on digital systems sharing so much personal information.
Right.
So where do we even begin with building trust in this whole, complex digital landscape?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
And it's becoming more urgent, I think, as our lives get more and more intertwined with the digital world.
Right.
One concept that I think has a lot of potential in this area is self-sovereign identity, or SSI.
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 Yeah.
And there's this quote that I think really captures the essence of this challenge. The internet was built without an identity layer.
Okay. That's interesting, but I'm not sure I fully get what that means. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Sure. So think back to, the early days of the internet.
Yeah.
The focus was really on connecting machines, not people.
Right.
So we ended up with this system where our online identities are kind of fragmented, scattered across tons of platforms, service providers.
Yeah.
We create accounts on different websites, share bits and pieces of our information here and there.
Yeah.
And it all ends up stored on servers that we have absolutely no control over.
So it's kind of like our digital selves are just out there scattered to the wind with no real ownership or control over how our information's being used.
Exactly. And that makes us really vulnerable. Not just to things like, data breaches and identity theft,
Right.
but also to the misuse of our data for things like targeted advertising, manipulation, even discrimination.
Wow.
SSI aims to change all of that
Okay.
by putting users back in control of their digital identities.
That sounds pretty empowering.
Yeah.
So how does SSI actually work in practice? What does it look like for the average person?
Imagine having this digital wallet on your phone
Okay.
where you store all your important credentials, your driver's license, passport, medical records, educational certificates, all that stuff.
Okay.
You control this information, and you get to decide what you share with whom and for what purpose.
So no more filling out endless forms online
Exactly.
and remembering a million different passwords.
Hopefully no.
That would be a dream come true. But how do you make sure all this information in this digital wallet is secure and tamper-proof?
That's where zero-knowledge proofs come in, or ZKPs. ZKPs. Yeah, these are cryptographic tools that allow you to prove something is true without revealing the underlying information.
Okay, that sounds like magic.
A little bit.
Can you give us a real-world example so we can wrap our heads around this?
Sure. Think of it like, showing your ID to a bouncer at a club.
Right.
You can prove that you're old enough to enter without revealing your exact birth date or address.
Right.
The bouncer just needs to verify that the information on your ID is valid.
Gotcha.
That's essentially what a ZKP does.
Yeah.
It lets you prove something is true without giving away all the details.
That's pretty cool. So I can see how that would be super valuable for, protecting sensitive information. Is this something that's already being used, or is it more experimental?
ZKPs are being used in all sorts of applications already, from secure voting systems to cryptocurrency transactions.
Yeah.
And they're becoming even more important as we move towards a more decentralized digital world, right? Where trust needs to be established without relying on these centralized authorities.
Right. It definitely sounds like ZKPs and SSI have the potential to really revolutionize how we manage our digital identities and build trust online. But how does all of this fit in with, the rise of quantum computing?
Right.
We talked earlier about how quantum computers could crack the encryption we use today. Does that mean all this new technology is vulnerable too?
That's a great question, and it's one that researchers are actively working on.
Okay.
While it's true that quantum computers could potentially break some of the cryptographic algorithms we use today, there's also a lot of work being done to develop post-quantum cryptography, or PQC.
PQC.
Yeah, it's kind of like a preemptive strike to future-proof our security against these super powerful computers.
Got it. So it's like an arms race, right?
Exactly.
Between the code makers and the code breakers.
Exactly. With the stakes getting higher and higher as this quantum computing technology gets more advanced.
Well, it's reassuring to know that people are on top of this,
Yeah.
and working on solutions to mitigate these potential threats. But I'm also curious about the impact on blockchain technology.
Okay.
I mean, we hear so much about how blockchain is secure and tamper-proof, but is that still true in a world with quantum computers?
It's complicated and there's no easy answer. Some blockchain implementations could be vulnerable to attacks from sufficiently powerful quantum computers,
Okay.
especially those that rely on older cryptographic algorithms.
So it's not like a guarantee of absolute security then?
Right, but here's the interesting thing. Blockchain also has some inherent properties that make it very resistant to quantum attacks.
Really?
For example, the way data is stored on a blockchain makes it incredibly difficult to alter even with a quantum computer.
So it's like a digital fortress with multiple layers of defense.
That's a great way to put it. And the blockchain ecosystem is constantly evolving, with developers actively working on ways to enhance its quantum resistance. We'll probably see a ton of innovation in this space in the next few years.
So while there are challenges, there's also a lot of optimism about blockchain's ability to adapt and thrive in this post-quantum world.
Absolutely. And we're already seeing some really promising developments.
Like what?
One example is LAC Chain, a blockchain network operating in Latin America and the Caribbean. They've actually implemented a pilot project that integrates post-quantum cryptography into their system.
That's pretty cutting edge. Can you tell us more about what they're doing?
Sure, their pilot project involves using a post-quantum signature algorithm called Falcon. Falcon, yeah. And they use that to generate and verify certificates on their network. It's a pretty innovative approach that addresses those potential quantum vulnerabilities while still maintaining compatibility with existing standards.
So it's kind of a bridge, right, between the current world of cryptography and the future world of post-quantum security.
Exactly.
I like that. It's a good reminder that we need to be thinking about these long-term security challenges now and, taking steps to mitigate them before it's too late.
Absolutely.
It's clear that technology is evolving super fast, and we all need to keep adapting to, stay safe and secure in this digital world. But I think beyond all the technical stuff, there's a whole other dimension we need to think about. Human rights in the digital age.
Right.
I mean, our fundamental rights don't disappear just because we go online.
Right. Of course not. In fact, as our lives become more and more intertwined with the digital world, protecting our rights online becomes even more critical. And that's where the concept of digital human rights comes in.
Digital human rights.
Or DHRs. It's basically applying those same principles of freedom of speech, privacy, non-discrimination that we value in the offline world to the online sphere.
Right. It makes sense that our rights should be protected no matter where we are, whether it's the physical world or the digital world. But how do we actually make sure those rights are upheld online? The internet's a global phenomenon, right?
Yeah.
It's not governed by any one country's laws.
That's true. The borderless nature of the internet definitely presents some unique challenges when it comes to, enforcing human rights. But there have been some important developments. The UN, for example, has been actively working on frameworks and guidelines for protecting DHRs.
So there are international efforts underway to address this.
Yes, but there's also some debate about the best approach. Some argue that the UN's focus on regulation is too heavy-handed,
Okay.
and it doesn't really take into account the nuances of different digital technologies and their applications.
Right.
They advocate for a more balanced approach that really weighs both the potential benefits and the potential harms of these technologies.
It sounds like a complex issue with no easy solutions. But one thing seems pretty clear to me. We need to empower individuals to safeguard their own digital rights.
I agree completely. That's where this idea of citizen at the core comes in.
Citizen at the core.
It's about raising awareness about digital rights,
All right.
promoting digital literacy, giving people the tools they need to protect themselves online.
So it's about knowledge and empowerment.
Exactly.
And there have been some important legal developments in India that, kind of support this principle.
There have the Shreya Singhal case.
Shreya Singhal case, yeah.
It was a landmark case. It struck down a section of the IT Act for violating freedom of speech, a major victory for digital rights.
So it showed that citizens have the power to push back against laws that infringe on their rights online.
Exactly. And the Supreme Court actually went even further. They issued directives to make sure that the struck down section wouldn't be applied.
Oh.
And they really tried to raise public awareness about the judgment. It was a clear sign that they take digital rights very seriously.
That's encouraging.
It is.
And what about the Puttaswamy case, the one that recognized privacy as a fundamental right? That seems like a really big deal for data protection.
Oh, it was a landmark ruling. The court emphasized principles like consent, purpose limitation, and proportionality in data processing.
So, break that down for us. What does that actually mean?
Basically, it means that your personal data can't be collected, used, or shared without your consent. And even when you do give consent, it can only be used for the very specific purpose for which it was collected.
So it gives individuals a lot more control over how their information is being used.
Exactly.
Can you give us an example of how this might play out in the real world?
Sure. Let's say you're using a health tracking app on your phone.
Okay.
Under the Puttaswamy ruling, the app developers would need to be super clear about what data they're collecting, why they're collecting it, and how they plan to use it.
Okay.
They would also need to get your explicit consent before sharing that data with any third parties, like, insurance companies or marketing firms.
That makes sense. It's all about transparency, giving users the power to make informed choices about their data. But even with these legal protections in place, it seems like building trust in digital health is still a big challenge.
It is.
I think a lot of people still have concerns about, data privacy, security, and the potential for technology to kind of dehumanize healthcare.
It's understandable, right? Even in the digital age, people want to feel like their health is being treated with care and compassion.
Right.
They want to know their data is safe and that they have control over how it's being used.
It's like that old saying, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Exactly.
It applies to healthcare just as much as anything else.
Yeah.
So how do we bridge that gap? How do we build trust in digital health when there's so much potential for misuse and misunderstanding?
I think transparency is absolutely key.
Okay.
Healthcare providers need to be upfront about how they're using patient data.
Right.
Obtain informed consent, implement really robust data security measures.
Makes sense.
And they also need to demonstrate that they're using technology in a way that benefits patients, not just for efficiency or to save money.
So it's not just about having the technology, it's about using it responsibly and ethically.
Exactly. And this requires a strong legal and ethical framework, right? To protect patient privacy and promote responsible data governance.
Okay, so clear guidelines and regulations.
Exactly, to make sure patient data is handled with care and respect.
So it's about building a system that prioritizes the well-being of patients and earns their trust.
Absolutely. And one way to do that is by adopting a hybrid care approach.
Hybrid care.
Yeah, it combines the efficiency of digital technologies with the human touch of, traditional healthcare.
Okay. So it's not about replacing human interaction entirely. It's finding ways to integrate it into the digital healthcare experience.
Precisely. Think about it. Even with virtual appointments, AI-powered diagnoses, people still want that personal connection, that empathy, that reassurance that can only come from another human being.
Right. It's a good reminder that technology should be used to enhance healthcare, not to replace the human element.
Right.
It seems like finding that balance is crucial for building trust and making sure that digital healthcare actually serves patients' needs.
I couldn't agree more. And this brings us to the final piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
The evolving landscape of global digital governance.
All right, let's get into that.
So we've seen a shift from a multilateral model, that was dominated by states, to a multi-stakeholder model.
Multi-stakeholder.
That includes industry, civil society, and all these other actors.
So it's becoming more decentralized, more collaborative?
It is, but this presents a whole new set of challenges.
Yeah.
There's a risk, for example, that powerful non-state actors, like big tech companies, could exert too much influence. And we need to make sure that there's equitable representation from the global south,
Okay.
so that the voices of developing countries are actually heard.
Because everyone deserves to have a say in shaping the future of the digital world.
Absolutely. And the UN is trying to address all these challenges with initiatives like the Global Digital Compact and the Summit of the Future.
I've heard of those.
Yeah, they're basically platforms for dialogue and collaboration
Yeah. Mhm.
aimed at establishing these shared principles and frameworks for a more equitable and inclusive digital future.
So it's about finding common ground, working together to navigate this very complex landscape.
Exactly.
But there's also, a growing recognition that states, governments, still have a really important role to play
Yes.
in making sure cyberspace is secure and stable.
Absolutely. This is what some people are calling cyber realism.
Cyber realism.
Yeah.
So it's not about going back to like a state-centric model,
Mm.
but acknowledging that a purely multi-stakeholder approach has its limits.
Right.
It's recognizing that governments do have a responsibility to protect their citizens in this digital frontier.
Exactly. The borderless nature of cyberspace, it means that states have to work together to address these shared challenges like cybercrime and online security.
Right.
But states also have to protect their own citizens from these threats and ensure that their rights are respected online.
It's a tough balancing act, right?
It is.
Finding that sweet spot between collaboration and national interests, between technological innovation and ethical considerations.
It is. But I believe that if we work together, we can create a digital future that's secure, equitable, and beneficial for everyone.
I like that sentiment. Well, I think we've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
From the potential of DPI and all these crazy evolving cyber threats to the importance of digital identity and privacy, the challenges of the post-quantum era, even adapting human rights principles to this digital age, and how to build trust in digital health. It's been quite a journey.
It has, and it's clear that we're really just at the beginning of this whole digital transformation.
Yeah.
The choices we make now will have a huge impact on how we live, work, and interact for years to come.
So we'll leave you with this thought. Given the crazy speed of digitalization, what role will you play in shaping a more secure, equitable, and trustworthy digital future? Because it's a future that we're all creating together, really.
We are.
One line of code, one policy decision, one click at a time.
That's a great way to put it.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful, maybe even a little inspiring. And until next time, stay curious.